Hello and welcome to AngularAir episode 46. This is our hello and welcome to AngularAir 46. This is our predictions show, and I'm here today with Patrick Stapleton
I guess.
and Amy Knight.
Hello.
So the idea for this show is that we're going to just go through a couple different topics and talk about what we think is going to happen in 2016 with Angular, with JavaScript, and with the other developer-related tools and languages that we work with. So to get started, a lot of this is related to Angular, but some of it will go off into some other areas as well. So I think the one thing that probably a lot of people are thinking about in the Angular world is when is going to be the full release of Angular 2. You know, we're going to go into the new year here in beta, and how long is it going to stay in beta before we're able to actually have like a full release? So Patrick, going to you first, what do you think is going to be that release date?
So the ideal scenario for everyone in the community it would be ngconf, and that is in May for the release of Angular 2. That would just be the best thing in the world, timing-wise, and that would be my guess, my prediction.
Okay, what about you, Amy?
I'm going to predict the same time frame. I don't necessarily think they're going to wait till like release it there. But.
Okay. Yeah, I think that they're going to do their best to get it before ngconf. I actually think, I think Patrick, you're thinking it's going to be like the day before or something like that. I actually think that they'll try to do it like a month or so before, so that there's some time and full release before the conference. But yeah, I think we all, the best scenario is to get it out before the conference, so that a lot of the talks are just about, okay, now let's start getting some real production apps built. Okay, let's get into some of the adoption stuff of, you know, as you're building on Angular 2 and some of the new stuff, you know, how we see people are going to adopt certain things. So first thing, we've had a show on this before, this earlier this year that Patrick, you and I were, I think we were the only ones on. TypeScript or Babel, what is the community going to lean towards? And Amy, let me start with you.
I definitely think TypeScript. I know for me, like I've done a lot more with Babel than TypeScript, but the more that I look at it, the more I think if you are doing Angular, it's obviously beneficial to be using TypeScript. I guess not, maybe even if you're not doing Angular, but definitely TypeScript.
Okay. What about you, Patrick?
Obviously Dart, because no, I actually. So remember, like right now, the Babel has a huge like ambition for where the direction of where it should go, and that's like being extremely modular. So right now, Babel 6 is kind of crazy, but a year from now, I would say that they'll kind of dial all that down, and maybe even TypeScript will be a part of Babel as a plugin, in which case we'll get the best of all worlds. But in terms of for Angular 2 development, it's a no-brainer that the TypeScript's definitely like the way to go. It feels right at home whenever you're developing with Angular 2.
Okay. Sounds good. Now, one of the great things in Angular 2 is that you can use different types of bindings. You know, the basic plain JavaScript binding that everybody's used to, or you can use reactive bindings with RxJS observables, or immutable.js and just make everything immutable for additional performance and that type of thing. So where do we think that most people are going to be leaning as they start implementing this stuff? I mean, you can sort of start to get a sense of this, of how the early adopters are building a lot of their examples. But what are your thoughts, Patrick, on this?
So I think like it takes a lot of learning in the community to kind of adopt some of these, like I would say like more advanced patterns that came out of other communities, and that is using like immutable.js and RxJS, just because the context is different. Like going from Angular 1 to Angular 2, the concepts are the same, but it's hard to kind of grasp all the mental overhead of everything that's new. The majority of everything that's new is just ES6 features and types with TypeScript. So I think the trends for frameworks is that everyone relearns everything all over again. So I think that the same thing's going to happen, that everyone's going to start off with whatever that they know currently, and then slowly migrate to these new like.
Which would probably be just plain JavaScript objects, right? Not not binding to.
Um, Actually, like RxJS is probably going to get the same amount of adoption as Promises was with Angular, and that is like eventually the community will arrive at you should definitely use this. But at the moment, it's more of like this is kind of cool. Not sure should I use it? Should I not use it? The community is still like kind of guessing whether or not they should. But in terms of like predicting like a year from now, because RxJS is so ingrained in Angular 2, everyone's going to be using it. For Immutable.js, I would say for larger applications, definitely, just because you want to squeeze as much performance out of the framework as you possibly can. Yeah, that's just how I would see it.
Okay. You have any additional thoughts, Amy?
Yeah, well, not really additional. I agree with Patrick. I think that RxJS will be super popular, especially by the end of the year. I feel like once people kind of get the grasp of Angular 2, they're going to be reaching for like something new to play with, and that is something that kind of makes Angular 2 a little bit more exciting to play around with. So I think people will definitely be interested in that.
One thing actually I'm curious your guys' opinions on sort of variation of this question. I was listening actually to Amy to the more recent episode of JavaScript Jabber talking with the PureScript guys, and I was thinking about in PureScript, their whole philosophy is on reducing things down so that it's just like very simple, like you don't have to have all these different variations. It actually Elm is even more so like that. You just do things this way. Whereas with Angular 2, it's like a different philosophy. It's like you can build in different approaches. You can use a reactive approach, or you can use this mutable approach. Do you think that will help or hurt the adoption as people start building this? Because sometimes when you give too much choice, people are like, it's like analysis paralysis, right? Like Amy, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely do think it's going to hurt. I think like kind of what we're seeing is the JavaScript community. I know we talked about this article. I think I sent you the article, Jeff, earlier in the week, but some article about classes and how the community is kind of going in two different directions.
Yeah, and that's another good example, like whether you use classes or not. Yep.
Yeah, so I think, unfortunately, I do think that it is going to like slow adoption because there's going to be a lot of different people doing a lot of different things, and I know probably for like larger organizations, they probably don't have as much time to experiment and play around with things, so they need like a proven strategy to move forward with. So.
Yep. Patrick, what do you think?
I think that, well, for me, like Angular 2 is pretty much everything that is Angular 1. That is conceptually the same, and that is also meaning that like the architectural decisions for Angular 2 is up to you, the developer. Like they have a suggestion, and that's the way the browser uses native events and everything. But everything else is technically you could poke and prod, move things around as much as you want. And in my opinion, that was kind of one of the benefits of Angular 1 is that because it had a very like light opinion on how you should organize your app, it was up to you to kind of figure out like and create your own pattern. So I think the exact same thing will happen in Angular 2 is that the community will slowly like adopt different patterns as they start experimenting more with RxJS, and we will arrive at a point where the community will eventually have this pattern with RxJS that they will say that this is the de facto like architecture you should use.
Yeah, it'll be interesting though to see how long that takes.
Yeah.
The hope is that that'll actually occur pretty quickly because I agree with you what you're saying, Amy, that until that happens, it's just going to be like a little bit of like fumbling around of like, people are like, okay, what should I use? But I think once you hit on that sweet spot and like it's pretty much clear cut throughout the community that like, okay, this is the way for most people that you should build your apps. Obviously, like you were talking about, Patrick, with certain like larger apps or certain things, you might do things slightly different. But I think things like using TypeScript, using classes for certain things. There might be a list of other things, but whatever it is, creating this idiomatic way of building Angular 2 apps. Hopefully we arrive at that sooner than later. Okay, so for module bundling, this is another area where there's like a lot of, in the survey that Patrick, you and I put out earlier this year, Webpack was sort of in the lead, but using just System.js or JSPM was kind of close behind that, and a lot of people still use Browserify. So do you think that, Patrick, Webpack's basically going to dominate once people start using it, Angular 2 in this new world of JavaScript, or do you think it'll just be a mixed bag?
Well, we all know JavaScript is choose your own adventure. I would say like the majority of people would choose Webpack just because it's a build framework, and that means that it assumes a certain opinion on your workflow, and because of that, it assumes that you're working on application development, in which case it allows you to focus more on the application, how you architect it, how you manage its assets as modules, as opposed to like you could do anything you want. I'm just a bundler, but you could also treat Webpack as just a bundler as well. So I think like if Webpack was more demystified, then that would help the adoption of Webpack.
Actually, one thing to add to that, so I think you're right, Patrick, but I think I saw, and you'd probably know more about this, that they were going to add in TypeScript some module bundling features as well. So maybe that for certain scenarios, you wouldn't even need Webpack. You'd just be able to use the TypeScript. Were you keyed into that at all?
I heard a little bit about that, but I don't know too much about it. But
Okay.
Also remember with application development and how these communities work is that the community learns how to make a small application that's like tutorials. And then eventually like they arrive on better patterns as more people start making larger applications. And you see a progression of like smaller examples to like medium size, which is majority of people, then large size, which is larger companies. And then there's like enterprise where you have literally multiple teams working on little sections of the page, and that's more like it's going to be, like I said, like it's going to be really interesting, and I think like this just demystifying Webpack would help that push. But I think Webpack's going to pull out in the end, just because like Webpack 2.0 is going to be released, assuming next year. In which case, that solves all the problems of Webpack, and then at that point, it's like, why even bother?
What problems are you referring to? Maybe I'm not aware.
So, like, some of the problems with some of the reasons why some people would choose something like System.js over Webpack is the standards, right? And standards for ES6. Now, it's also worth noting that the ES6 like module standard, not the syntax, the standard is actually dropped, which kind of kills some of the momentum of why you would choose System.js over something like Webpack. But with Webpack 2.0, it's actually focusing more on the standards, on
the standards that aren't standards, you're saying?
Well, like ES6 syntax. So right now, currently, it's focused on CommonJS and require statements, just because it was built, back when that was the thing. But now it's going to switch to ES6 syntax with import statements, as opposed to require statements, and the default syntax.
Okay. And actually, sorry, you guys getting an echo right now? Okay, there we go. So one thing that you said, Patrick, actually as well, the whole thing of the community kind of generally starts with these smaller apps, and you were talking in the context of Webpack, but actually you got me thinking about one other prediction I'd be interested in hearing, like Amy, your opinion on in particular. That when new people are coming in to learn Angular, one of the biggest strengths of Angular 1 was how easy it was to learn. Like, you just get started, and that's what everybody said. It's just like magic, right? And I think that was a big part of the initial popularity of Angular 1. uh, is the additional complexity of ES6, all this other stuff. How is it? Do you think it's going to affect that adoption?
Uh, yeah, it's twofold. So the fact that you can easily get up and running with stuff, like we have all these seed projects and that sort of thing. It's easy for people to get this like fast feedback cycle and like get excited about it. But then you reach a point where there are so many tools involved to get to that point that you start slowing down and you lose that steam because you're like, where in the world do I start? So yeah, the more tools we have, the slower it's going to be for people to actually start making meaningful contributions as opposed to, just building up these like little to-do apps really quickly without really understanding how they're getting put together.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that most people that have gone through the learning process with so far with Angular 2 have, I think the common consensus is that the framework itself is much easier to learn and simpler, but it's harder overall because of all these other things. What do you think, Patrick? What's going to happen here in 2016 as far as learning?
So I would say that 2016 is the year that everyone switches to ES6, in which case everyone's going to have to learn more about the build system. And I would also say that it's finally the time for the JavaScript community to actually mature and kind of grow up in that sense of not just being client, but being like a full build tool system and actually building web applications as opposed to just like static websites per se. And that's kind of like what everyone's trying to push because everyone wants these like ES6 syntax just because like it improves so much, especially just the module itself. Having modules itself is like that's the number one problem in JavaScript, and that's pretty much how I would see it. Is that after because like if you actually and I've been experimenting this with teaching Angular 2 is if the person knows ES6 and TypeScript or just ES6, like the introduction and the conceptual like understanding of Angular 2 is like nothing. It's like it's so easy after that. Like that's the only barrier to entry for Angular 2 is just the conceptual dependencies. Then everything else makes a lot more sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to add too, like I still think it's really valuable. People might scoff at this, but to build just a plain old website with just bare bones tools so that when you do go to use all these tools, you have a better understanding of what they're doing for you. So I make a lot of comparisons between like Angular and Rails because kind of very similar in the community. Like you can get an app up and running really quickly, but a lot of times you really have to take your time once you do that to step back and see how everything's getting put together.
Yeah, like you're saying, I think that is a big problem with the starter projects, right? Like there's so much stuff kind of baked into there that some people, like I actually like looking through them, like Patrick, the Webpack one that you put out, like I really enjoyed like looking through it and understanding like each line and kind of playing with it. But I think most people just kind of like run it and then, I don't know how this works, but it's just part of the thing, I guess.
So what's happening is that, again, like because everyone relearns everything, like what we're running into is the exact same phenomena as Ruby on Rails. Like everyone's going to be like, okay, this is the framework that does everything in the world. I only need to know about this part of what's happening, and then the whole rest of the folder structure I'm just going to ignore. What's missing from that piece that is really like I would say like hindering more people from following into that development cycle? It's a lot of people explaining, like demystifying a little bit of why those folders and why everything should be placed a certain way. That is something that the Rails community has been doing for a long time and saying like, everything's generated now. This is for that. This is for that. You don't have to worry about this. I don't even know what that is. And like that alone like helps people like understand like, okay, if I just work inside of this box and then don't touch don't hit any of the walls, then I'm good. I think like with the adoption of these new build systems and because of ESX, like uh, that's just something that community has to do. Is um, a lot of education that ways. But I guess another prediction really is like, will ESX be in the browsers in a year from now? Like, because it's ESX
Hmm.
2015, right? Like that's already over.
That's a good one. Yeah.
So um, for 1 year from now, I would think that the browsers are all 1 year behind, and that's probably optimistic because that's saying like at the end of 2016, ES 2015 will be implemented in the browsers, and then there's a 1 year lag for each one, and then there's ES 2017, which would be adopted in the browsers later.
I think one other thing to keep in mind, like we do these podcasts, we kind of have like our community that we talk to a lot, and they're the ones that are answering these surveys and stuff. So of course they're plugged in. They're doing a lot outside of their jobs and such. But then you have a huge section of the community who is still really trying to get started with Angular 1. They're still trying to grasp Angular 1. They're not, a part of this community, so they don't respond to those surveys. So that's another thing, like we have to think about slow adoption because not everyone, um, you know, gets to do this 24/7 like a lot of us.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, Amy. I love how Joe Eames, when I was talking to him over during the GD summit, he described it as these. I think you mentioned dark mass developers. That just like this. You don't see them. There are just tons of them out there because they aren't actively involved on Twitter or anything like that. And there's a lot of them. They just do Angular for their jobs, and they don't even. They might not even be aware that there is an Angular 2. That definitely happens a lot, I think. So that's a good transition to one of our last couple of questions here as we wind down. So let's say, for example, just before ngconf that it's in full release. What do you guys predict is going to happen? As far as there are a number of different strategies that people can take for Angular 2. You can use this ng upgrade thing to have, start to have pieces of your app, migrated slowly. You could do like just a big bang approach. You could do nothing, which I think a lot of people may end up doing, just kind of sit on the sidelines and kind of wait it out. Patrick, what do you think is going to happen as far as that goes?
I always advocate the Big Bang approach, just especially for this transition. The transition afterwards would be so much simpler. But right now, I always suggest the Big Bang approach for most projects, and that is saying that because it's a framework, you could think of it as literally the car, and there's a car frame that actually holds all the pieces together. So if the framework is just the frame of the car, and all the pieces together is just like your modules and your logic and everything, then what you're doing is you just have a new frame, and then you just slowly like move pieces over to the new frame, and that's probably going to be the best migration for like Ionic developers for Ionic 1 and 2, even though like the directives are almost extremely similar because of the HTML syntax. But for that's just my suggestion of what I would like.
You say Big Bang, but do you actually mean, like, I think from what you're saying, something that I think we've talked about before where, okay, you have this, like, let's say this huge app that you built in Angular 1, you may be able to pick pieces out of it and build a separate app, right? Like, and they could, maybe they don't, it's not the same thing as ng upgrade where there are two apps, like, working side by side, but if you can build a new thing, like basically all your new development in Angular 2, I think that helps. But I agree that like trying to do both at the same time, I wonder whether the effort for that is going to be worth it, basically. But
No,
what do you think, Amy? Oh, sorry, Patrick, what did you say?
yeah, it's so the effort of something like that, it's worth it for large applications just because you can't get away from it. You can't like you have to keep shipping, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
the only way to move forward. And for that, I would say like that makes sense for larger applications. But yeah.
Okay. What do you think, Amy?
I actually think for larger applications, it still will be Big Bang. Especially, I guess it will depend on how up to date you've been keeping your application. Like this whole component pattern really didn't become terribly popular until a little while ago, so a lot of apps are not on that. I also feel like just from talking to a lot of people, there's still a lot of people in the community who are slowly migrating their code to ES6. There's still, unfortunately, a lot of people in the community who are using $scope. So I feel like adding one more kind of, I'll call it like layer of noise, because it's another like kind of semi-context you have to switch into. Like you're already having to switch context, you see $scope. You're having to switch context, like what is this like constructor thing in my controller, but in others I have controller as. Why do I even have controller, whereas some people don't? I think just like adding one more thing. So I think a lot of people are just going to be rewriting.
Yeah, so that's why like I think like the framework Big Bang approach is kind of interesting because if you have a lot of legacy code that are using a lot of older patterns, like that would kind of make sense. But if you're using like the component-driven approach, then you could take actually the optimum migration path, and that's a migration path moving forward after Angular 2, and that is saying that everything inside of this component is a black box. So anything inside of it could be implemented in Angular 2 or Angular 1, and that is where ng upgrade ties in very well with the migration path going forward, because you could say like everything on this page is Angular 1 except the sidebar. Sidebar is Angular 2, and you interact through ng upgrade or some other mechanism which you can use as well, and then slowly migrate forward from there. But yeah, if you are already doing the component approach, then that migration path is a lot easier. But if you are not, then I would say Big Bang is worth it unless you really can't, unless the application is so huge that it's really hard to move forward.
Okay. All right, last question. Most important question. No, not last question. But at the end of 2016, what do you guys think will be the most popular front-end framework? Patrick.
So I've been looking into this framework called Vanilla.js. It's pretty legit. It has kind of everything that you would want and more. And I would say that it's kind of like all the frameworks combined. It's pretty legit. So I think at the end of 2016, everyone would be using Vanilla.js, which actually I think is a dependency on Angular 2. So if that has something to say, then I think the adoption of Angular 2 will go a lot faster with that dependency.
Vanilla has a dependency on Angular 2, you're saying?
Oh no, I guess the other way around.
Okay. Amy, what do you think?
I actually think that things are going to kind of even out a little bit. I don't see like React pulling much further ahead than maybe people think it already is. I don't see Angular 2 pulling ahead much further than Angular 1 already is. Yeah, my prediction is not a ton is going to change there. I think you'll hear more about Vue.js, but I think that'll be more of a competitor to React than to Angular.
Yeah, it's funny you bring this up, Amy, because it sort of ties into what my prediction is going to be, which is that I think that the adoption for new people, like basically when you're on a new project, it's one thing if you're talking about existing projects because there's a lot of like legacy stuff out there. So like from that standpoint, I mean, there's just a ton of Angular apps, right? But I think the more interesting thing is for people, either new developers coming in or new projects being built. And I do think that React will continue to grow, but I think it is being slowed by these other frameworks that are somewhat similar, but like you start to see these sort of like breaking off of different like subgroups. Where like the people that were super duper into React, some people are now into Elm, into like these other things, and I think that's going to start to chew away at it a little bit. And I don't think that Angular 2 is going to take off this next year. I think what's going to happen is, I mean, especially because it's not going to be till the middle of the year that it's in fully release. I think a majority of people are going to sit on the sidelines for basically all of 2016. Like when we talk about like, not the people like we were talking about, Amy, that are into the podcast and like everything like that. Those people are probably going to be on top of it and trying things out, and you should as much as possible. But I have a feeling that 2016 is just going to be the year of sort of evening out, getting more people into ES6 and Vanilla.js and kind of leveling the playing field. 2017, I think, is when Angular will really take off. I mean, who knows what's going to happen by then? But I think just by that point, a lot of things will be baked. There'll be a lot of people with production apps with Angular 2. The people, all the legacy people that have been working on Angular 1 will start to upgrade. I think 2017 is going to be the bigger year for the larger majority of people. But Patrick, what were you going to say?
Yeah, so also remember that React is a rendering framework. Like a lot of people say that it's
I think most people when they say React, they actually mean React plus like the stuff that normally goes with it. But,
yeah, and so there's a distinction between background, which is library, React, which is a rendering framework, and Angular, which is a web framework. And what's also interesting to take note is that like where has like a framework of any kind has been so hyped up that people are making a ton of content and a ton of stuff and so much hype before it's even launched. Like the last one was famous, and well, I mean that's a bad comparison.
Well, Jesus, don't say that. What are you doing? That's terrible.
Yeah, but like with famous, you couldn't even. It wasn't even like no one could play with it. But like if you look at a Google Trends and you actually add like React Native versus like Angular 2, and you'll see that it's actually like as popular as React was at the beginning of this year, 2015. And that's again, it's not even out yet. Like what's going on here? Why is everyone like talking about this framework that's not even out? Like that alone is like crazy because what's also interesting is that a lot of people are going to check out Angular 2 from other communities just because everyone knows about Angular. And what is that it's going to be pretty awesome, in my opinion.
Amy?
Yeah, one other thing I was going to add too that I think whichever framework is going to allow this will probably push ahead. But for a lot of teams, we have like a bunch of APIs, but we have one UI that's talking to all these different APIs. So like I predict people are going to be looking at ways of pulling apart their UI into pieces so they can like deploy sections of their UI one at a time, similar to like how we do our backends.
Yeah, that would actually be pretty awesome. Definitely. Okay, we're getting near the end of our time. Do you guys have any other random predictions that you're thinking about that we didn't cover?
Did we go over IDEs?
We didn't. I mean, there's a couple interesting ones that IDEs, the mobile thing is kind of interesting, like which mobile framework's going to...
I was a huge fan of text editor on Windows.
Oh, geez, for editors.
You want to, because remember, Douglas Crawford talked about how like syntax highlighting was for kids, and to be a real adult, you don't need syntax highlighting. So I'm just going to follow him.
Douglas Crawford is a real man.
Yeah, so I don't need autocompletion or indentation. I'm just going to go hardcore text editor on Windows. I'm going to install a Windows VM and then just like YOLO it out.
You might. Why don't you just code on punch cards? Why even like a typewriter or like a keyboard?
Punch cards. That's hipster. That's hipster code right there.
I don't want to grow up if that's what you have to do when you're growing up.
Yeah.
Oh jeez. All right, guys. Let's go to the picks. Amy, do you have any picks to start off?
Yeah, I did have one really quick. So similar to what we're talking about, kind of trends. I saw this posted earlier today, but it is just the general JavaScript community and trends over where we're at right now. So it's at ponyfoo.com, and I will add a link for that. That's my pick.
Great. Thanks. Patrick.
Mine would be NGNO in Amsterdam. It's an Angular conference in 2016, and Angular class will be doing the training there. I'll be flying out there to do the workshop.
All right, that's cool. Yeah, we're actually going to do a show from NGNL that you will be
Yeah,
hosting along with Carmen. What's that?
Oh, I will be present at that episode. Yeah.
Okay. I got a couple picks. Christmas, love Christmas. One thing I would say, if you don't have kids, once you have kids, your Christmas experience is like night and day from your experience without kids. It is crazy how excited they get, and like they get you excited because they're so amped up. It's nuts. New Year's also great. So that's another pick. One thing I wanted to I'll put a link to that I was looking at the other day that was interesting is that last year, or the beginning of this year, I published a blog post with my predictions for 2015, and actually they are amazingly accurate. Like I didn't even think about it all year, but seriously, like I think it was like 90% right as far as different trends and other things. So I'll put a link to that, and I'll have to do another one of these in January as well.
Yeah, so your pick is the past.
Yeah.
Your pick is the future. It's the future past or the past future.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely.
Thanks.
All right. Great. Definitely join us next week. We're going to have an awesome show talking about how to be a contributor in open source for those people that want to kind of get into open source but aren't quite sure how, with Wesley Cho and Jesus Rodriguez, who are big contributors on Angular UI Bootstrap, and the new NG Bootstrap library. So I'm really excited to talk to them about that. Have a great holidays, and we will see you guys soon.
Bye.